They mocked her as a gold digger, until the mafia boss she loved burned their house to ashes. The alarm clock on the bedside table buzzed at 4 a.m, a harsh, mechanical sound that sliced through the thin walls of the studio apartment. Emily Carter did not groan or hit the snooze button. She simply reached out a slender hand, silenced the noise, and sat up in the darkness. The air in the room was stale, recycling the heat of the day before, and the streetlights outside filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the worn duvet. At 27 years old, Emily felt a bone-deep exhaustion that usually belonged to someone twice her age. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet finding the cold linoleum floor. This was her reality now. There were no heated marble floors, no Egyptian cotton sheets, and certainly no maid waiting to bring her coffee on a silver tray. Those things belonged to a life she had lived 2 years ago, a life that now felt like a fever dream she had finally woken up from. She moved to the kitchenette, which was little more than a sink and a hot plate crammed into the corner of the room. As she waited for the tap water to heat up for instant coffee, her eyes drifted to the refrigerator. It was a humming, rusted beast covered in magnets, holding up the few tangible reminders of why she was doing this. There was a clipping from a local newspaper about academic scholarships, and next to it, a photograph of her younger brother, Noah. He was smiling in the picture, looking frail but determined, wearing a graduation cap that sat slightly askew on his head. Underneath that photo was another one, half hidden by a takeaway menu. It was an old glossy print from a society column. In it, Emily was wearing a silk gown that cost more than her current annual rent, her arm looped through the tuxedo-clad arm of Jackson Hale. They looked like the perfect couple, the golden boy of Harborview real estate and his stunning wife. But Emily knew what lay behind those frozen smiles. She knew the coldness of his touch and the suffocating control of the Hale family dynasty. She turned away from the photo, feeling the familiar burn of shame and anger in her chest. The divorce had been brutal, a public spectacle orchestrated by the Hales' high-priced legal team. They had painted her as a predator, a woman who had seduced a wealthy heir solely for his fortune. They called her a gold digger. The press ate it up. And because of the ironclad prenuptial agreement she had signed, believing foolishly in love, she had walked away with absolutely nothing. No alimony, no settlement, just a mountain of debt from the medical treatments Noah had needed during her marriage, treatments Jackson had promised to cover but then leveraged against her when she tried to leave. Emily drank her coffee black, the bitter taste grounding her. She had 2 jobs to get to. The first was the morning shift at The Grind, a bustling cafe in the financial district. The second was a cleaning service that ran late into the night. She rinsed her cup, dressed in her black uniform, and pinned her dark hair back into a tight, practical bun. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the world. By 8 a.m, The Grind was at maximum capacity. The air was thick with the smell of roasted beans and the cacophony of milk steamers, espresso grinders, and the impatient chatter of Harborview's elite. Emily moved through the tables with practiced efficiency, balancing trays of lattes and pastries, her face set in a polite, impenetrable mask. She was wiping down table 4 when she heard the giggle. It was a high, sharp sound that pricked at her skin. "Oh my God, is that her?" a voice whispered, loud enough to carry over the din. Emily froze for a fraction of a second before forcing her hand to continue wiping the surface. She recognized the voice. It belonged to Sarah Jenkins, a woman she had gone to private school with on a scholarship, back before everything fell apart. "It is," another voice replied, dripping with mock pity. "I heard she lost everything in the divorce. Jackson really cut her loose." "Well, that is what happens when you marry for a bank account instead of love," Sarah said, her tone pitching up as if she wanted the entire room to hear. She must be scouting for her next victim. Maybe she thinks if she serves coffee to enough CEOs, one of them will be dumb enough to marry her. Emily felt the heat rise up the back of her neck, a slow, burning humiliation. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the soft click of a phone camera shutter. They were taking pictures. By noon, Those photos would be circulating in group chats and maybe even on the local gossip blogs that still found sport in tearing her down. The fallen misses, Hale, serving lattes. She straightened up. Clutching the dirty rag in her hand, she turned to face them, forcing a tight, professional smile onto her lips. "Can I get you ladies anything else?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Sarah smirked, looking Emily up and down with disdain. "Just the check. We do not want to keep you from your hunt." Emily walked away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She went behind the counter, gripping the edge of the granite until her knuckles turned white. "Do not cry," she told herself firmly. "You are doing this for Noah. You are doing this so he can finish community college without drowning in loans. You are doing this so you never have to ask a man for a single dime ever again." The door to the cafe opened, and the bell chimed. Usually, the sound was lost in the noise, but this time, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was subtle at first, a dampening of conversation, heads turning toward the entrance. A group of 4 men walked in. They were dressed in immaculate, tailored suits that cost more than the cars parked outside. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace, taking up space without asking for it. But it was the man in the center who commanded the silence. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his dark charcoal suit. He wore no tie, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar to reveal a glimpse of tanned skin. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that seemed carved from granite, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were dark, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. Dominic Nico Moretti. Even Emily, who tried to avoid the news, knew the name. The rumors about the Moretti family were woven into the fabric of Harborview. They said his family controlled the docks, the construction unions, and half the city council. They said he was a businessman by day and a kingpin by night. Nothing had ever been proven. Of course. Men like Nico Moretti did not leave paper trails. The manager, a nervous man named Steve, practically tripped over himself to greet them, guiding them to the best booth in the back corner. "Emily," Steve hissed, snapping his fingers at her. "Table 12, take it, and for the love of God, do not mess anything up." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. She smoothed her apron and picked up her notepad. Walking toward the booth felt like walking into the center of a storm. The men were talking in low voices, but they stopped as she approached. Nico was sitting in the corner, his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room with a relaxed but alert intensity. When Emily reached the table, his gaze shifted to her. It was heavy, physical, like a touch. "Good morning," Emily said, her voice automatic. "Can I start you gentlemen off with some coffee?" The men ordered quickly. Black coffees, espressos. When she turned to Nico, he did not bark an order like the others. He looked at her. Really looked at her, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw and the tension in her shoulders. "You look like you have been on your feet for 10 hours, Nico said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and rough all at once, like whiskey poured over gravel. It was not an insult. It sounded like an observation. Startlingly intimate. Emily blinked, caught off guard. It has been a long morning, sir." "What is good here?" he asked, ignoring the menu on the table. "And do not tell me the most expensive thing. Tell me what is actually good." From 2 tables away, Sarah whispered loudly, "Look at her working it. She smells money." Nico's head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing. He had heard it. Emily felt the color drain from her face. She waited for him to sneer, to make a joke, to join in the humiliation. That was what men with money did. Jackson had taught her that, instead. Nico's gaze returned to hers. Softer this time. "The pastry," he prompted gently. "Which one?" "The almond croissant," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "We bake them fresh at 5. 2 almond croissants, then," Nico said, holding her gaze for a beat longer than necessary. "And a black coffee." Emily retreated to the counter, her hands shaking as she prepared the order. Why had he looked at her like that, like she was a person, not a servant or a punchline? She loaded the tray and made her way back to the booth. As she passed a table near the center of the room, a man in a flashy suit, one of the types who like to loudly discuss stocks on his phone, stood up abruptly to put on his coat. He swung his arm back without looking, his elbow colliding hard with Emily's shoulder. The impact jarred her. The tray tipped. A cup of scalding hot coffee launched off the saucer and splashed onto the floor, splattering across Emily's shoes and the man's expensive Italian loafers. "Hey!" the man shouted, turning on her with instant aggression. "Watch where you are going, you stupid girl! Look at my shoes!" Emily gasped, the heat of the coffee soaking into her socks. "I'm so sorry, Sorry. Do you know how much these cost?" The man loomed over her, his face red. "You are clumsy and incompetent. No wonder your husband dumped you." The cafe went silent. The cruelty of the remark hung in the air. Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, hot and sudden. She bent down to pick up the shattered ceramic, just wanting to disappear. Suddenly, a shadow fell over her. Nico Moretti was there. He did not rush, yet he had moved across the room with terrifying speed. He reached down, his hand large and warm, and caught Emily's wrist. He did not pull her up roughly. He simply steadied her, his grip firm and grounding. "Leave it," Nico said. He pulled her to a standing position, placing himself between her and the angry customer. Nico was inches taller than the other man, his shoulders broader, his presence infinitely more dangerous. "She spilled coffee on me," the man sputtered, though his confidence was faltering as he looked into Nico's eyes. "You bumped into her," Nico said. His voice was calm, conversational even, but there was an edge to it that made the hair on Emily's arm stand up. His jaw was tight, a muscle feathering under the skin. "I saw it. You were careless. Well, she should have been watching," the man stammered. Nico took a step closer, invading the man's personal space. "Apologize." "What?" "Apologize to the lady," Nico said softly. "And then you are going to leave a very generous tip for the trouble you caused." The room was deathly quiet. The man looked around, realizing no one was going to help him. He looked back at Nico, saw the darkness in those eyes, and withered. I am sorry," the man muttered, looking at the floor. He pulled a $50 bill from his wallet, threw it on the table, and hurried out the door without looking back. Nico turned to Emily. The terrifying aggression vanished from his face, replaced by a concern that confused her. He looked down at her coffee-stained apron. "Are you burned?" he asked. "No," Emily breathed, her heart racing so fast it felt like a bird trapped in her chest. "I am fine. Thank you. You did not have to do that." "Yes," Nico said, his eyes searching hers. "I did." He stared at her for a moment longer, as if memorizing her face, before turning and walking back to his booth. Emily stood there, trembling, the ghost of his touch still burning on her wrist. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Emily avoided table 12, letting another server handle the check, too overwhelmed to face him again. When her shift finally ended at 6 in the evening, the sky had turned a bruised purple, heavy with rain clouds. She changed out of her uniform and exited through the back door into the alley. Clutching her coat tight against the wind, she was exhausted, her feet throbbing, dreading the long bus ride to her second job. A black car was idling at the mouth of the alley. It was a sleek sedan with tinted windows, the kind of car that glided over the potholes of Harborview like a shark through water. As Emily stepped onto the pavement, the rear door opened, and Nico stepped out. He was still in his suit, though he had put on a long black overcoat that made him look even more imposing. He wasn't looking at his phone or checking a watch. He was looking directly at her, as if he had been waiting. Emily stopped, her hand tightening on her purse strap. "Mr. Moretti." "Dominic," he corrected gently. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. "Nico is fine, too." You are waiting here?" Emily asked, confusion knitting her brow. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Nico said. "After the incident inside, I'm fine," Emily said, her defensive walls slamming back into place. "I'm used to people being rude. It is part of the job." "It should not be," Nico said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small glass jar, the tip jar from her station. He had stuffed a thick roll of cash into it. "You left this on the counter." Emily looked at the money. It was too much. Far too much. "I cannot take that. It is yours," Nico said, stepping closer to place the jar in her hands. His fingers brushed hers, warm and rough. "And for the record," he lowered his voice, the sound of it vibrating in the narrow alley, "people who talk like that about you, they do not know anything. They look at you, but they do not see you. There is a difference." Emily looked up at him, startled by the intensity in his tone. His eyes were dark, framed by thick lashes, and they held a depth of understanding she hadn't expected. For a moment, she forgot he was a rumored mob boss. She only saw a man who had defended her when the rest of the world watched her humiliate herself. "Why do you care?" Emily whispered. "You do not know me either." "I would like to," Nico said simply. A rumble of thunder shook the sky, and the heavens opened up. Rain began to fall in sheets, cold and sudden. "Get in," Nico said, gesturing to the car. "I will drive you home." "No," Emily said instinctively, taking a step back. "I cannot. I barely know you." "It is pouring, Emily," Nico said, using her name for the first time. It sounded different when he said it, protective, solid. "And this is not a safe neighborhood to be standing in the dark. Please, let me give you a ride." Emily hesitated. She knew the rumors. She knew getting into a car with a man like Dominic Moretti was dangerous in a way she couldn't quantify. But the rain was soaking through her thin coat, and her bones ached. And when she looked at him, she didn't feel the fear she should have. She felt a magnetic pull, a dangerous curiosity. "Just a ride," Emily said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "And drop me a block away from my apartment. I do not want neighbors talking." Nico nodded solemnly. "1 block away. I promise." He opened the back door for her, shielding her from the rain with his body as she slid onto the leather seat. He went around to the other side and got in beside her. The interior of the car was a sanctuary. It was warm and silent, the noise of the city cut off instantly. The air smelled of expensive leather, rain, and him, a scent of sandalwood and something crisp, like expensive scotch. "Where to?" the driver asked from behind the partition. Emily gave the intersection a block from her apartment. The car pulled away smoothly. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, charged with an electricity that made Emily's skin prickle. She was hyper-aware of him sitting next to her. His thigh was inches from hers. She could see his hands resting on his knees, large, capable hands that had caught her wrist with such gentle strength. She shivered, though not from the cold. "Are you cold?" Nico asked, noticing the movement. He reached for a dial on the door to turn up the heat. "I am fine," Emily said, though her voice sounded breathless to her own ears. She turned to look at him and found he was already watching her. In the dim light of the passing street lamps, the sharp angles of his face were softened. "You work 2 jobs," Nico stated. "The cafe and the cleaning service." Emily stiffened. "How do you know that?" "I pay attention," Nico said. He shifted slightly, turning his body toward her. "Why? The Hales have millions. Did he really leave you with nothing?" "It is complicated," Emily said, looking out the window at the rain-blurred streets. "And it is none of your business." "You are right," Nico said quietly. "It is not." He didn't press her. He didn't demand answers or offer pity. He simply sat with her in the darkness, a solid, unwavering presence. Emily felt a strange urge to tell him everything, about Noah, about the debt, about how tired she was of fighting the world alone, but she swallowed the words. The car slowed as they approached her drop-off point. The driver pulled over to the curb. "This is it," Emily said. Nico nodded. He didn't wait for the driver. He opened his door, stepped out into the rain, and walked around to her side. He opened her door and offered her a hand to help her out. Emily took it. His grip was warm, his palm calloused. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she realized they were standing very close. The umbrella the driver had popped open did little to stop the wind, and they were huddled together in the small pocket of dry space. "Thank you," Emily said, looking up at him. for the ride, and for earlier. You do not have to thank me for basic decency, Emily, Nico said. He was looking down at her, his dark eyes focused entirely on her face, raindrops caught in his hair, glistening like diamonds. He leaned in slightly, just an inch. The movement was slow, deliberate. Emily's breath hitched. She felt a sudden, insane urge to close the distance, to lean into the warmth radiating from him. Her eyes flickered to his mouth. His lips were parted slightly. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The sound of the rain faded. There was only the heat of his body and the scent of sandalwood. Nico's gaze dropped to her lips. His eyes darkened, a flash of raw hunger visible for a fraction of a second before he reined it in. He seemed to force himself to stop, his jaw tightening. "Go inside," Nico said, his voice rougher than before. "Get warm." He let go of her hand slowly, his fingers trailing against her palm as they pulled away. "Good night, Nico." Emily whispered, "Good night, Emily." She turned and walked quickly toward her apartment building. Clutching her coat tight, she didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on her until she turned the corner. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic, heavy rhythm. She was terrified of the rumors, terrified of his world, and terrified of the debt that was drowning her. But more than anything, she was terrified by the realization that for the first time in years, she didn't want to run away. She wanted to turn back. Over the next 5 days, a pattern emerged at the grind that was impossible for anyone to ignore. At 10 in the morning, just as the breakfast rush began to taper off, the heavy glass door would open, and Dominic Moretti would walk in. He never looked at the menu. He never looked at the other customers who fell silent at his arrival. He walked straight to the back corner, to table 12, and sat down. He would order a black coffee and a pastry, always asking for Emily's section. Sometimes he brought a newspaper, other times he checked emails on a sleek black phone, but mostly he watched. He watched her wipe down counters. He watched her balance heavy trays, and he watched the way she forced a smile for rude customers. The other staff members noticed immediately. In the narrow galley kitchen, between the hiss of the dishwasher and the clatter of plates, the whispers grew louder. "It must be nice," Sarah said one afternoon, leaning against the counter while Emily loaded a tray of dirty mugs. "Having a personal ATM sitting in your section every day, does he tip you in hundreds?" "He's just a customer," Emily said, keeping her voice level, though her stomach twisted. "Right," another waitress chimed in, smirking. "Just a customer who wears suits that cost more than my car and stares at you like he wants to eat you alive. You really do have a type. Emily, rich, dangerous, and loaded. The gold digger strikes again." Emily gripped the edge of the sink, the hot water scalding her hands. But she did not turn around. She focused on the rhythm of the work. Scrub, rinse, dry. If she stopped moving, the label they had pinned to her chest would feel too heavy to bear. Gold digger. It was a brand that refused to fade. The situation spiraled from whispers to public humiliation on a Thursday afternoon. Emily was on her break, sitting on a milk crate in the back alley, trying to eat a stale bagel. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a notification from a social media app she rarely checked anymore, terrified of what she might find. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Her breath hitched in her throat. A gossip account known for covering the Harborview social elite, an account heavily influenced. Emily knew, by the Hale family PR machine, had posted a new photo. It was grainy and taken from a distance, telephoto lens style. It showed Emily standing in the rain from a few nights ago, stepping into Nico's black sedan. The lighting made the scene look illicit, shadowy. The caption read, "Spotted the disgraced Mrs. Hale, crying poverty by day but hopping into luxury rides by night. Seems the ink is barely dry on the divorce papers, and she is already hunting another millionaire. Some habits never die." Emily's thumb hovered over the comments section. She knew she should not look. She knew it would be poison, but she scrolled down anyway. She moves fast. One comment read, "I heard she drained Jackson's accounts before he caught her." Another said, Watch your wallet. Mystery man. Once a leech, always a leech. The phone slipped from her numb fingers. Clattering onto the pavement, Emily wrapped her arms around herself, burying her face in her knees. Her shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. It did not matter that she was working 2 jobs. It did not matter that she ate instant noodles so she could send money to Noah. It did not matter that she had refused to take a single penny from Jackson that was not hers. To them, she was a villain, and the narrative was being written by people who had never spent a day worrying about rent. She wiped her face aggressively with the rough sleeve of her cardigan, sniffing back the tears. She would not let them see her cry. She picked up her phone, turned the screen face down, and went back to work. That evening, the closing shift dragged on until nearly midnight. By the time Emily clocked out, her feet were swollen and her eyes burned with fatigue. She pushed open the back door, expecting the empty, trash-strewn alley. Instead, she found Nico. He was leaning against the hood of his car, arms crossed over his chest, looking at the stars that were barely visible above the city lights. He was wearing a navy suit tonight, the jacket unbuttoned, looking effortlessly commanding even in the dim light of the street lamp. He straightened up as the door clicked shut behind her. "You're here again," Emily said, her voice hollow. She was too tired to be polite, too drained to be afraid. "I am," Nico said. He didn't move toward her, respecting the distance between them. "I checked the schedule posted by the register. I knew you closed tonight." "Why?" Emily asked. She walked down the few concrete steps, clutching her purse. "Why do you keep coming here, Nico? People are talking. They are saying things." "Let them talk," Nico said, his voice low and dismissive. "Wolves do not concern themselves with the opinions of sheep." "I am not a wolf," Emily said, stopping in front of him. "I am the one they are tearing apart. They took a picture of me getting into your car. They are calling me a gold digger again." Nico's expression darkened, a flash of genuine anger crossing his features. "I saw the post. I am handling it." "You cannot handle the internet," Emily said with a tired sigh. She started walking down the sidewalk, away from him and away from the car. "I am walking home. Do not follow me." "I will walk with you," Nico said. He fell into step beside her. He did not offer the car this time. He seemed to understand that she needed the air, the movement. They walked in silence for 2 blocks, the city of Harborview quiet around them, the rhythmic click of Emily's sensible work shoes mixed with the heavy, solid thud of Nico's dress shoes. "Tell me something," Nico said after a while. "Not about the Hales, not about the divorce. Tell me about you." Emily glanced at him sideways. "There is not much to tell. I work, I sleep, I pay bills. That is what you do," Nico corrected. "That is not who you are. What did you want to be? Before the world got loud?" Emily looked ahead, the streetlights blurring slightly. It was a question no one had asked her in 3 years. Jackson had only ever asked what she was wearing to the next gala, or if she had finalized the menu for his dinner parties. "I wanted to bake," Emily admitted, the words feeling fragile in the night air. "My grandmother taught me. We used to make sourdough, pastries, cakes. I love the science of it, the way you could take simple things, flour, water, yeast, and create something that made people happy. I wanted to open a small bakery, just a tiny place, nothing fancy, just somewhere that smelled like vanilla and home." She waited for him to laugh, to tell her it was a small, silly dream for a woman who had once been married to a real estate mogul. "You should do it," Nico said. Emily let out a short, bitter laugh. "With what capital? I can barely afford my electric bill." "Money is just a tool," Nico said, looking at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Passion is rare. If you can bake like you describe, the rest is just logistics." Emily stopped walking. She looked at him, really looked at him. Under the harsh yellow of the street lamp, he didn't look like a mob boss. He looked like a man who was seeing her, not the scandal, not the debt, but the woman beneath it all. "You are weird. Dominic Moretti," she whispered. "I have been called worse," he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in an almost smile. As if on cue, the sky opened up, It was a sudden, torrential downpour, typical of the coastal city in autumn. "Come on," Nico said, grabbing her hand. They ran toward the nearest shelter, ducking into the recessed stone doorway of an old bank building. The space was small, forcing them together. Emily pressed her back against the heavy wooden doors, shaking the water from her hair. Nico stood in front of her, shielding her from the wind and the spray. They were breathless, laughing slightly from the sudden sprint. But as the laughter died down, the silence that followed was heavy and charged. The space was too small. Nico was too close. Emily could smell the rain on his suit, mixed with that intoxicating sandalwood scent. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, inches from her own. Nico reached out. His hand was large, his fingers long and elegant. He gently brushed a wet strand of dark hair away from her cheek, tucking it behind her ear. His fingertips grazed the sensitive skin of her jawline, and Emily felt a jolt of electricity shoot straight down her spine. Her breath stuttered. She looked up, locking eyes with him. His irises were so dark they were almost black, swirling with a heat that terrified and thrilled her. The city noise, the cars, the rain, the distant sirens seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of her own heart hammering against her ribs. Nico leaned closer. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to push him away. He paused when his lips were a mere breath away from hers. "If I kiss you," Nico murmured, his voice rough and quiet, vibrating in the small space, "is it because of who I am, or because of who you are with me?" The question hung between them. It was a lifeline. He was asking if she saw the money or the man. Emily felt her throat tighten. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and sudden. "I do not even know who you are," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hear the stories, I see the suits, but when you look at me, Nico, I do not feel like a gold digger. I do not feel like a failure. I just feel like me." Nico let out a breath, a sound that was half groan, half relief. He closed the distance. The kiss was slow at first, tentative. Nico's hand cupped her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. Emily's eyes fluttered shut, her hands, acting of their own accord, reached out and curled into the crisp fabric of his white dress shirt. Then the hesitation broke. Nico groaned low in his throat, tilting his head to deepen the kiss. It wasn't polite. It wasn't the chaste, performative kissing she had known in her marriage. This was raw. It was hungry. Emily rose on her toes, pressing her body against his. She could feel the solid, unyielding strength of him, a wall of muscle and heat. His other arm came around her waist, pulling her flush against him, crushing her breasts against his chest. She felt the steady, powerful thud of his heart under her palm, beating in time with hers. His thumb stroked her cheek, a rhythmic, grounding touch amidst the storm of sensation. His hand at her waist slid up her back, broad and firm, settling at the nape of her neck to hold her close. The heat between them built rapidly, a fire that had been smoldering since he first defended her in the cafe. It was a fierce longing she had refused to acknowledge, a desperate need to be held, to be wanted, to be safe. For a moment, there was no debt, no hails, no rumors. There was only the taste of him, coffee and rain, and the overwhelming reality of his desire. But the reality of who she was and who he was crashed back in. Emily pulled away first. She gasped, breathless and flushed, her lips swollen and tingling. She stumbled back a half step, hitting the wooden door behind her. I cannot," she stammered, her hands flying to her mouth. Panic flooded her chest. "I cannot be that girl, the one who jumps from one rich man to another. I cannot let them be right about me." Nico didn't move to grab her. He stayed where he was, breathing hard, his eyes blown wide and dark. He saw the panic in her eyes and stepped forward slowly, not to kiss her again, but to comfort her. He gently pressed his forehead against hers. He didn't try to hold her body, just that point of contact, grounding her. "Breathe, Emily," he whispered. "I'm sorry," she rambled, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry. I should not have. I do not want anything from you. I swear." "Shh," Nico murmured. "Listen to me. You do not owe me anything. You do not owe me your number. You do not owe me your story. And you certainly do not owe me your future." What just happened? That was just us. No titles, no bank accounts. The tenderness in his voice, the utter lack of demand, made her eyes sting. He wasn't asking for a transaction. He was offering a moment. "I have to go," Emily whispered, though her feet felt rooted to the spot. "Go," Nico said softly, pulling back to look her in the eye. "Be safe." Emily turned and ran into the rain, not looking back, her heart aching in a way she hadn't realized it could. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. 2 days later, the video surfaced. Someone had been filming from across the street, a blurry, shaky video of 2 figures in a doorway. But the silhouette of Nico Moretti was unmistakable, and the woman in the waitress uniform clinging to him was clearly Emily. The clip went viral in Harborview. The Hale family circle amplified it instantly. Jackson's mother, a woman with ice water in her veins, was quoted in a society blog saying, "It is sad to see how low some people will stoop for relevance and security. We wish her the best in her new employment." The customers at the grind grew bolder. They didn't just whisper anymore. "There she is," a man said loudly as Emily poured coffee at table 4. "Found another wallet, did you? Be careful, sweetheart, this one bites back." "How much for the coffee?" another sneered. "Or do you only take payment in diamonds now?" Emily moved through the shift like a ghost, her face pale, her hands trembling so badly she dropped a spoon. At the end of the shift, Steve, the manager, called her into his cramped office. He looked uncomfortable, shifting papers on his desk. "Look, Emily," Steve said, not meeting her eyes, "you are a great worker. Really, but the image? It is becoming a problem. We have customers complaining about the drama. We are a family establishment. I'm just doing my job." "Steve," Emily said, her voice pleading, "I cannot control what people say." "I know," Steve said, "but if this continues, if the cafe's reputation suffers, I might have to let you go. Just keep your head down, and maybe tell your boyfriend to stop coming by." Emily walked out of the office, feeling like the walls were closing in. If she lost this job, she wouldn't be able to make the payment for Noah's tuition next week. She walked out the back door, desperate for air, and found Nico waiting there. He looked furious, not at her but at the world. He was pacing the small alleyway, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he saw her, he stopped. "I saw the video," Nico said without preamble. "I know what they are saying." "Please go away," Emily said, her voice cracking. "Steve just told me I might get fired. Because of you. Because of us." "Fired?" Nico's jaw tightened. "He cannot do that." "He can," Emily said. "He can do whatever he wants. I am nobody. Nico, I am just the gold digger everyone loves to hate." Nico reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a thick white envelope. It was bulky, heavy. "Take this," Nico said, holding it out to her. Emily stared at the envelope. She knew exactly what was inside. "What is that?" "It is a loan," Nico said, his voice urgent. "Enough to clear your debts, enough to pay for your brother's school so you do not have to work here anymore. You can quit. You can open the bakery. You can tell Steve to go to hell." The air between them seemed to crackle. For a second, Emily saw the freedom in that envelope, the relief, the end of the double shifts and the aching feet, but then she saw what everyone else would see, the transaction. The proof that they were right. Fury, hot and blinding, surged through her veins. "Is that what you think I am?" Emily asked, her voice shaking with a rage that frightened even her. "You think you can just buy my problems away? You think because I kissed you, I am looking for a payout?" "No." Nico stepped forward, frustration etching lines into his forehead. "I am trying to help you. I have the means. Why should you suffer when I can fix it with a snap of my fingers?" "Because it is my life!" Emily shouted, shoving the envelope back at him. It hit his chest and fell to the dirty pavement between them. "I am not a charity case, Nico, and I am not a kept woman. I spent 2 years being owned by a man with money, and I swore I would never do it again. If I take that money, I am exactly what they say I am. I am not Jackson, Nico roared back, his control slipping. I am not trying to own you. I am trying to protect you. You cannot protect me by turning me into a whore. Emily spat the word, the shame of it burning her tongue. Nico flinched as if she had slapped him. Silence crashed down on the alley. Heavy and suffocating, they stood there, chests heaving, staring at each other. The anger was there, but beneath it was something else, a profound, aching desire. They wanted each other so badly it hurt, but the chasm between their worlds felt impossible to bridge. Emily, Nico whispered, reaching out a hand. No, Emily said, stepping back. Tears streamed down her face. Pick up your money, Nico, and leave me alone. She turned and ran down the alley, her heart shattering with every step. She left him standing there in the dim light, the white envelope lying in the mud at his feet, both of them realizing that love might not be enough to survive the fire they had started. The Grand Harbor Hotel was a monument to the kind of wealth that insulated people from reality. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a prismatic glow over the ballroom. The air smelled of expensive perfume, fresh orchids, and the crisp scent of old money. For the guests arriving in their limousines, it was just another Friday night charity gala. For Emily Carter, it was a minefield. Emily stood near the service entrance, wearing the stark black and white uniform of the contracted catering company. Her hands, encased in white cotton gloves, moved rhythmically as she polished champagne flutes, ensuring not a single smudge remained. She had debated calling in sick. The thought of serving the very people who had watched her life implode 2 years ago made her stomach turn. But the tuition bill for Noah's final semester at community college was sitting on her kitchen counter, and the late fees were accruing daily. She needed the overtime pay. She kept her head down, focusing intently on the glass in her hand, hoping that the anonymity of the uniform would act as a shield. Most of these people never looked the help in the eye anyway. To them, she was just a pair of floating white gloves delivering alcohol. However, luck was not on her side that evening. A ripple of laughter cut through the ambient noise of the string quartet. Emily recognized the pitch immediately. It was high, sharp, and performative. She froze as a shadow fell over her station. "Oh my goodness, Jackson, look!" a voice said, dripping with faux delight. "It is the famous X." Emily slowly lifted her head. Standing before her was Sabrina, Jackson Hale's new fiancée. She was wearing a crimson gown that clung to her figure, a diamond the size of a grape weighing down her left hand. Beside her stood Jackson, looking handsome and bored in his tuxedo, a scotch glass loosely held in his fingers. The conversation in the immediate vicinity died down. Guests turned, their eyes darting between the woman in the red dress and the woman in the server's uniform. "Hello, Sabrina," Emily said, her voice steady despite the heat climbing up her neck. "Hello, Jackson." Sabrina took a step closer, invading Emily's workspace. She picked up one of the polished glasses, inspecting it theatrically against the light. "It is so good to see you finding your place." "Emily," Sabrina said, her voice loud enough to carry to the surrounding tables. "I was just telling Jackson that it must be hard for you, being back in this room, but I suppose you are used to serving people, right? Or are you just auditioning for your next rich husband? I hear the market is tough for used goods." A few guests chuckled nervously. Others looked away, studying their shoes or their drinks, uncomfortable with the naked cruelty of the display but unwilling to intervene. Jackson merely smirked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Easy, babe," Jackson said, though his tone lacked any real reprimand. "She's just doing her job. Someone has to clean up after us." Emily felt her face burn. The humiliation was physical, a tightness in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She wanted to throw the tray of glasses. She wanted to scream instead. She gripped the polishing cloth until her knuckles ached. "Enjoy your evening," Emily said stiffly. Sabrina laughed again, a sound like breaking glass, and looped her arm through Jackson's. "Oh, we will. Try not to drop anything, sweetie. The deposit on these glasses is probably more than your rent." They walked away, leaving Emily standing in the spotlight of their malice. She felt stripped bare, reduced to nothing more than a punchline. She turned back to her station, her vision blurring, forcing herself to pick up another glass. Focus, she told herself. Do it for Noah. Across the room, the double doors opened. Dominic Nico Moretti entered the ballroom. He did not look like the other men. While they wore their tuxedos like costumes, Nico wore his sharp black suit like armor. He moved with a predator's grace, silent and lethal, cutting through the crowd without ever saying a word. He was ostensibly here as a legitimate businessman, a platinum sponsor for the charity, but the air around him shifted wherever he walked. 3 of his associates fanned out behind him, blending into the periphery, their eyes scanning the room not for hors d'oeuvres, but for threats. Nico's gaze swept the ballroom, ignoring the mayor and the socialites vying for his attention. He was looking for one thing. He found her near the bar, her shoulders hunched, her face pale. He saw the way Jackson Hale was looking back at her from across the room, a smirk playing on his lips. He saw the tension in Emily's posture, the way she seemed to be making herself as small as possible. His jaw tightened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He signaled one of his men with a subtle nod, indicating the Hales. Before he began to move toward the service area, Emily saw him coming. For a moment, panic flared. She did not want him to see her like this, serving his peers, humiliated by her ex. But as he got closer, she saw the look in his eyes. It was not pity. It was a dark, simmering rage that was entirely focused on the people who had hurt her. She could not handle it. Not here. Not now. Emily set down the glass and slipped through the swinging door that led to the service hallway. It was a narrow, utilitarian corridor lined with stacks of chairs and extra linens, smelling of industrial cleaner. She leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes, trying to regulate her breathing. The door swung open again. The sounds of the gala swelled for a second before being cut off as the door clicked shut. Nico stood there, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hallway reflected in his dark eyes. He looked out of place among the mops and buckets, a dark prince in a scullery. "Emily," he said, his voice low. "Please do not—" Emily whispered, opening her eyes. "I cannot do this right now. Nico, I just want to finish my shift and go home." Nico walked toward her. He did not stop until he was standing directly in front of her, blocking out the rest of the corridor. "Did he ever hurt you?" The question was blunt, stripped of any polite euphemism. Emily blinked, startled. "What?" "Jackson," Nico clarified, his voice hard. "I watched the way he looked at you, like he owned you, like he enjoyed breaking you. I need to know. Emily, did he ever put his hands on you?" Emily shook her head, a reflexive denial. No, he never hit me. He was not like that." "Then what was he like?" Nico pressed, stepping closer. "Because violence is not always a fist." The dam broke. The shame of the last hour, the last 2 years, came rushing up. "He made me feel small," Emily confessed, her voice trembling. "He never hit me, but he controlled everything, the money, the friends I was allowed to see, the clothes I wore. He let his family call me trash at the dinner table and told me I was too sensitive when I cried. And when I finally left, he made sure everyone thought I was the villain so he could keep his perfect reputation." Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "He made me believe I was worthless without him." Nico's expression fractured. The mask of the indifferent businessman fell away, revealing the man beneath, fiercely protective and visibly pained by her pain. He stepped into her personal space, reaching out. He took both of her gloved hands in his. He did not just hold them, he guided them up, placing her palms flat against his chest, directly over his heart. "Feel that?" Nico asked, his voice rough, barely a whisper. Emily could feel the heavy, rhythmic thud of his heart through the layers of his suit and shirt. It was steady, strong, and undeniably real. "You are not worthless," Nico said, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "No one gets to define your worth, Emily. Not a man with a trust fund, not a bitter family, and certainly not a rumor. You are stronger than all of them combined. His thumbs moved slowly, stroking the backs of her fingers, the motion rhythmic and grounding. It was an anchor in the storm of her emotions. "Nico," she breathed, the name falling from her lips like a prayer, pulled by the gravity of his gaze and the heat radiating from his body. Emily leaned in. It was an instinct, a need to be closer to the only source of warmth in her cold world. Nico reacted instantly. He released her hands and wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. His other hand came up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in the loose strands of hair that had escaped her bun. They collided. The kiss was not tentative this time. It was heated, searing, a desperate reclaiming. Nico backed her up until her shoulders hit the wall, his body caging her in, shielding her from everything outside that hallway. Emily let out a soft sound, her hands bunching in the lapel of his expensive jacket, pulling him closer. He tasted like scotch and danger. His mouth moved over hers with a hunger that stole her breath, demanding and giving in equal measure. His hands splayed at her lower back, holding her steady as her legs threatened to give out. The world narrowed down to the sensation of his lips, the rough slide of his tongue, and the overwhelming feeling of safety in his arms. For the first time in years, Emily did not feel like a victim. She felt desired. She felt cherished. She felt powerful. The door to the ballroom burst open. "We need more champagne at table." "Oh!" A young waiter froze in the doorway, eyes wide, holding a tray of empties. Emily and Nico sprang apart. Emily smoothed her apron, her chest heaving, her face flushed a deep crimson. Nico turned slowly, shielding Emily from the waiter's view with his broad shoulder. He adjusted his cuffs, his expression shifting instantly back to cool indifference, though his eyes were still dark with blown-out pupils. "Give us a minute," Nico said to the waiter. It was not a request. The waiter squeaked an apology and let the door swing shut again. The silence that followed was thick with unsaid words. The air between them pulsed, electric and heavy. Emily looked at Nico, at the man who walked in shadows, the man who frightened people just by entering a room, and realized with a terrifying clarity that she was dangerously close to falling in love with him. "I have to get back," Emily whispered, though every fiber of her being wanted to stay in that hallway with him. Nico nodded, his jaw tight. He reached out, running a thumb over her lower lip, which was swollen from his kiss. "I will be watching," he promised. "If they say one more word to you, I am ending the party." The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and adrenaline. Emily managed to avoid the hails, sticking to the back of the room until the event wound down. When she finally clocked out at 2 a.m, her body ached, but her mind was still racing with the memory of Nico's hands on her. The employee parking lot was dark and deserted, located a few blocks from the hotel entrance to keep the staff cars away from the guests' luxury vehicles. Emily hurried to her 10-year-old sedan, the keys clenched in her hand like a weapon. She got in, locked the door, and started the engine. It sputtered but turned over. She pulled out onto the empty street, eager to get home to the safety of her apartment. The drive was quiet. The city of Harborview was asleep, the streets slick with the earlier rain. Emily turned onto the coastal highway that led toward her neighborhood. She was doing 40 miles per hour when the steering wheel gave a violent shudder. She frowned, gripping the wheel tighter. "Come on," she muttered. "Not now." The shudder turned into a violent shake. The car pulled hard to the right, toward the guardrail and the dark ocean drop-off beyond. Panic flared in her chest. Emily slammed on the brakes, but the car didn't respond the way it should have. The front right corner dipped sharply, metal grinding against asphalt with a horrific screech. The car swerved wildly. "No, no, no," she screamed, fighting the wheel with all her strength. She managed to wrestle the car away from the guardrail, spinning out across the empty lanes. The vehicle came to a shuddering, screeching halt on the shoulder, facing the wrong way. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the sound of her own gasping breath and the ticking of the cooling engine. Emily sat there for a long moment, her hands frozen to the steering wheel, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was alive. She was unhurt. But the terror was cold and absolute. She climbed out of the car on shaking legs. The front right wheel was at an impossible angle. 3 of the lug nuts were missing entirely, and the 4th had sheared off. This was not wear and tear. This was sabotage. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling so badly she dropped it twice. She didn't call the police. She didn't call a tow truck. She dialed the only number that made her feel safe. "Nico," she sobbed when he answered on the first ring. An hour later, the scene on the side of the highway looked less like a roadside assistance call and more like a military operation. 2 black SUVs were parked around Emily's car, hazard lights flashing. Nico's men were inspecting the vehicle with flashlights. Emily sat in the passenger seat of Nico's car, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Holding a cup of tea that one of the men had miraculously produced, she was still shaking. Nico stood outside, talking to a man in a mechanic's jumpsuit who had been examining the wheel. The man spoke quietly, gesturing to the hub. Nico's face was a mask of stone, but the tension in his shoulders was terrifying. He opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. The interior light cast shadows across his face. "It was not an accident," Nico said, his voice terrifyingly calm. The lug nuts were loosened, intentionally. They wanted the wheel to come off at speed. Emily covered her mouth, a fresh wave of nausea rolling over her. "Who? Why would anyone—" "My contact at the hotel pulled the security footage from the employee lot," Nico said. He held up his phone. On the screen was a grainy, black and white video. It showed a figure in a hoodie kneeling beside Emily's car. The figure turned slightly, and the profile was blurry but recognizable to anyone who knew the Hale family's inner circle. "That is Marcus," Emily whispered. He is Jackson's driver, his fixer." Nico put the phone away. "Jackson? He tried to kill me?" Emily asked, her voice rising in hysteria. "Over a rumor, over a gala?" "No," Nico said. "He tried to scare you. If he wanted you dead, the brake lines would have been cut. Loosening a wheel is a warning. It is designed to terrify, to make you crash, maybe get hurt, but mostly to remind you that you are not safe." He reached over, tucking the blanket tighter around her. His knuckles brushed her cheek, and the gentleness of the touch was a stark contrast to the violence in his eyes. "I'm taking you home," Nico said. "My men will handle your car. One of them will sit outside your apartment tonight." "Nico," Emily said, grabbing his wrist, "what are you going to do?" Nico looked at her. For a second, she saw the monster the city whispered about. "I am going to have a conversation." Jackson Hale was enjoying a nightcap in the library of his family's sprawling estate. The gala had been a success. Barring the awkwardness with Emily, he swirled his vintage scotch, feeling satisfied with the way Sabrina had put his ex-wife in her place. The heavy oak doors of the library opened. Jackson didn't look up immediately. "Marcus, did you take care of the—" He froze. It was not Marcus. Nico Moretti stood in the doorway. He was alone, but his presence filled the room like a sudden drop in pressure. He walked in, closing the doors behind him with a soft, deliberate click. "How did you get in here?" Jackson demanded. Standing up. "Security. Your security is taking a nap," Nico said pleasantly. He walked to the liquor cabinet, picked up a crystal decanter, and inspected it. Nice house. Flammable. Though, all this old wood. "Get out," Jackson said, his voice wavering slightly. "I will call the police." "Go ahead," Nico said. He set the decanter down with a sharp clack. "Tell them about the man standing in your library. And while you are on the phone, I will tell them about the footage of your driver tampering with a vehicle 3 hours ago. Attempted vehicular manslaughter carries a heavy sentence. Jackson. Even for a Hale." Jackson went pale. He sank back into his leather chair. "I do not know what you're talking about." Nico crossed the room in 2 long strides. He placed his hands on the arms of Jackson's chair, leaning down until they were nose to nose. The smell of smoke and cold rain clung to Nico's suit. "Listen to me very carefully," Nico said, his voice a low, guttural growl. You think because you have money, you can play games with people's lives. You think Emily is weak because she follows the rules. She is a gold digger, Jackson spat, trying to muster some bravado. She is playing you, Moretti, just like she played me. You are falling for a professional con artist. Nico smiled. It was a thin, razor-sharp expression that didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a trapped rabbit. If she is a gold digger, Nico whispered, then I am the vault, and I protect what is mine. He leaned closer. If anything happens to her, if she trips on a sidewalk, if she gets a flat tire, if she gets a paper cut, I will come back here, and I will not be here to talk. I will take apart your life, brick by brick. I will bankrupt your companies. I will expose your family's tax evasions. And then, I will deal with you personally. Nico straightened up, brushing invisible dust from his lapel. Stay away from her. Jackson, this is your only warning. Nico turned and walked out of the room. Jackson sat frozen in his chair, his scotch forgotten, his hands trembling, outside, in the cool night air. Nico got into his car. He didn't turn on the radio. He sat in the silence, his heart still pounding with a cold, calculated rage. He had threatened Jackson. Yes, but he knew men like Jackson Hale. They didn't listen to warnings. They only listened to force. Nico pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. It is me, Nico said when the line connected. Start digging. I want everything on the Hale family finances, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the payoffs, everything. We are going to burn them down. He looked back at the mansion looming in the darkness. He wasn't done. He was just getting started. For 3 days. Emily Carter's phone buzzed incessantly on her nightstand, a rhythmic vibration that felt like a heartbeat she was trying to stop. Every time the screen lit up with the name Nico, a fresh wave of nausea and longing crashed over her. She did not answer. She did not text back. She simply watched the light fade to black, over and over again, burying herself under the weight of her own fear. The silence in her apartment was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the chaotic thoughts racing through her mind. The incident with the car wheel had terrified her, but the aftermath had terrified her more. Not the violence itself, but the realization of what standing next to Dominic Moretti actually meant. It meant becoming a target. It meant confirming every whisper, every sneer, every tabloid headline that painted her as a woman who traded her soul for proximity to power. On Thursday afternoon, Emily sat in the worn armchair of Dr. Evans's office. The upholstery was scratching against her legs, and the ticking clock on the wall seemed to count down the seconds of a session she could barely afford. Doctor. Evans was a kind woman with graying hair and eyes that seemed to see through the walls Emily built. You have not mentioned him today. Doctor, Evans said gently, looking over her spectacles. The man from the gala, Nico. Emily picked at a loose thread on her jeans. There is nothing to mention. I stopped talking to him. Why? Because it is dangerous, Emily said, her voice tight. Because someone tampered with my car. Because everyone thinks I am a gold digger. And if I date a man like him, I am just proving them right. I am trying to be smart. I am trying to protect myself. Doctor. Evans leaned forward slightly, clasping her hands. Are you protecting yourself, Emily? Or are you punishing yourself? Emily looked up, startled. What does that mean? It means that for 2 years, you have lived a life of penance for a crime you did not commit, the therapist said softly. You have denied yourself help, comfort, and connection because you are terrified of being perceived as dependent. You run the moment things feel real because if you are alone, no one can accuse you of using anyone. But being alone is not the same as being safe. The words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Emily left the office feeling exposed, the question rattling in her bones. Was she running for safety, or was she just running? Across the city, in the back room of a nondescript import-export warehouse near the docks, the atmosphere was far less clinical. The air smelled of cigar smoke and stale coffee. Nico stood by a window that looked out over the gray waters of the harbor. his back to the room. "It is confirmed then?" Nico asked, his voice low and devoid of warmth. Leo, his second-in-command, sat at a metal table strewn with files and tablets. "It is confirmed. The Hales are not acting alone. They do not have the spine for this kind of escalation on their own. They are being backed by the Rinaldi syndicate." Nico turned slowly. The Rinaldis were a rival faction from the south, a group that had been trying to encroach on Moretti territory for a decade. They were ruthless, messy, and lacked the code of honor Nico tried to maintain. "The Hales are useful idiots," Leo continued, tapping a screen. "The Rinaldis are using Jackson's grudge as a smokescreen. They know they cannot take you in a direct war. Nico, you are too fortified, so they are trying to bait you. They are targeting the girl." "Emily," Nico corrected sharply. "Emily," Leo amended. "They are using the social media smear campaign to isolate her, to paint a target on her back. They want you to react. They want you to do something rash, something public that draws the heat of the police or the feds, leaving your operations exposed. If you go to war over a waitress, the other families will see it as weakness. They will say you are thinking with your heart, not your head." Nico looked back out the window. His reflection in the glass was grim. He knew the game. It was a classic strategy. Attack the king's heart to make his hand shake. But knowing it was a trap did not make the rage burning in his gut any cooler. "They think she is a weakness," Nico murmured. "Is she?" Leo asked, a brave question that hung in the silence. Nico did not answer. He just watched a seagull fight the wind over the water. His decision already made. That Saturday, Emily went to visit Noah at his small apartment near the community college. She needed to see him, to remind herself of the only pure thing in her life. But when she arrived, she found Noah sitting on his floor, surrounded by textbooks, with a dark expression on his face. He held up his phone as she walked in. "Have you seen this?" "No," Emily said instinctively, putting up a hand. "And I do not want to. I am off social media. Noah, it is better that way. They are saying you are feeding him information," Noah said, his voice shaking with anger. "There is a thread going viral saying you are a double agent, that you played Jackson and now you are playing this Moretti guy, selling secrets between them. They are calling you a Black Widow." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. It was getting worse. It wasn't just gold digger anymore. Now it was dangerous. "It is just lies. Noah, it is just internet noise." "Is it?" Noah stood up, tossing the phone onto the couch. "Because it feels like a coordinated attack. And I hate watching you take it. I hate watching you shrink yourself to try and make it stop." "I'm not shrinking," Emily argued weakly. "I am surviving. I cut Nico off. I am handling it." "You are hiding," Noah corrected. He walked over and grabbed her shoulders, looking her in the eye. He was younger than her, but in that moment, he looked years older. "I know you worked yourself sick for me. I know you paid my medical bills and my tuition and never asked for a thank you. You are the strongest person I know, but you are also the loneliest. I am scared, Noah," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. "I am scared of making another mistake. I chose Jackson because I thought he was safe, and he destroyed me. If I choose Nico, his world is fire. If I get burned this time, I do not think I will survive it." Noah softened. He pulled her into a hug, resting his chin on her head. "I cannot tell you what to do. But answer me one question. Do you feel safer with him or without him?" Emily closed her eyes. She thought of the cold rain in the alley. She thought of the car swerving on the highway and the terror of being alone. And then she thought of Nico's heartbeat under her hand, the solid wall of his chest, the way he had looked at Jackson Hale with lethal promise. The answer terrified her. The sun had set by the time Emily got back to her neighborhood. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows on the pavement. She was juggling 3 bags of groceries and a stack of mail she had grabbed from her box, her arms aching. She turned the corner toward her building and stopped dead. Nico was there. He wasn't leaning against a car this time. He was standing right in front of the steps to her apartment building, his hands in the pockets of his black overcoat. He looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago, and the stubble on his jaw was heavier. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. She stiffened, clutching the grocery bags tighter as if they were shields. "You are blocking my door," Emily said. Her voice was meant to be firm, but it came out breathless. Nico didn't move. He didn't offer to take the bags. He didn't smile. He just looked at her with a raw, unguarded intensity that stripped away her defenses. "You stopped answering," Nico said. His voice was hoarse, rougher than usual. "I have been busy," Emily lied, looking anywhere but his eyes. "You've been running," Nico corrected. He took a step closer, entering her personal space. He smelled of cold air and that familiar sandalwood. "I need to know. Emily, I need you to look at me and tell me the truth. Are you done with me? Is this it? Or are you just scared?" The vulnerability in his tone cut her. This was a man who commanded armies of men, who burned down obstacles without blinking. And yet, standing on her cracked sidewalk, asking if she wanted him. He looked terrified of her answer. The grocery bags slipped from Emily's fingers. They hit the concrete with a soft thud, a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, a bag of apples rolling slightly. She didn't care. "I am scared," Emily admitted, the words tearing out of her throat. "I am terrified. Nico, look at you. Look at your life. And look at me. I am just a waitress who cannot pay her bills. If I let you in, if I let this happen, they will destroy me, and your world will crush me." "My world is dangerous," Nico said, stepping closer until the toes of his shoes touched hers. "I will never lie to you about that, but the danger is out there. Emily, not here, not between us." He raised his hand slowly. He hesitated for a second, his fingers hovering inches from her face, giving her one last chance to back away. When she didn't move, he cupped her cheek. His palm was warm, his thumb brushing away a tear that Emily hadn't even realized had fallen. "I feel like I can breathe when you are around," Emily whispered, leaning into his touch instinctively. It makes no sense. It is insane, but I feel safe." "Then let me keep you safe," Nico murmured. He didn't wait for an answer. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the doorway or the hallway. This was urgent. It was a collision of fears and needs. Nico's free hand found her waist, pulling her body flush against his, while the hand on her face slid back into her hair, gripping her to hold her steady. Emily let out a soft gasp against his mouth and wrapped her arms around his neck. She gripped his shoulders, feeling the hard muscle beneath the expensive wool of his coat. She needed to feel his reality. She needed to know he was solid. The kiss deepened, becoming a desperate language of its own. Nico groaned low in his throat, a sound of pure want, as his tongue swept into her mouth. He tasted of mint and desperation, their bodies pressed together from chest to thigh, seeking friction, seeking heat. Emily felt the rush of desire flood her veins, drowning out the logic, the rumors, and the fear. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, their foreheads resting against each other. Emily's lips felt swollen, throbbing with the memory of his pressure. Her thoughts were hazy, spun sugar and smoke. "Upstairs," Nico rasped. "We cannot do this on the sidewalk." Emily nodded, unable to speak. She bent to grab her groceries, her hands shaking, but Nico beat her to it. He scooped up the bags in one hand, his other hand finding the small of her back, guiding her toward the door, inside her apartment. The world shrank down to the four walls of her living room. Emily locked the door, engaging the deadbolt with a heavy click. She didn't turn on the overhead light. She simply switched on the small lamp by the couch, bathing the room in a soft, amber glow. The tension in the room shifted. The explosive urgency of the sidewalk mellowed into something thicker, more intimate. They sat on her small, thrift store couch. They sat close, their knees touching, facing each other. Nico placed his hand on hers where it rested on her thigh. He began to trace the bones of her knuckles with his thumb, a rhythmic, idle motion that grounded her. "If we do this," Emily said, her voice steadying in the quiet, "if we are really going to try, I need you to understand something. Tell me, Nico said, his eyes focused entirely on her mouth. I cannot be a kept woman. Emily said, I cannot have you paying my rent or my brother's tuition or buying me cars. I need to know that I can stand on my own 2 feet, because if this ends, if you leave, I cannot be left with nothing again. I need to know that I am with you because I want to be, not because I need your money. Nico stopped tracing her hand. He looked up, meeting her gaze. The desire thrumming under his skin was visible, a tightness in his jaw, a darkness in his eyes. But he listened. No secret cash, Emily continued. No expensive gifts that I cannot refuse. And you do not get to control my decisions. You do not get to tell me where I can work or who I can talk to. Jackson tried to own me. I will not let you do the same. Nico took a deep breath. He looked down at their joined hands. It goes against every instinct I have, he admitted quietly. My instinct is to give you everything, to build a fortress around you and fill it with gold so you never have to worry again. But I hear you. He looked back up, his expression solemn. I promise. No handouts, no control. You are your own woman, Emily. I would not want you any other way. Emily let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for days. Okay. Nico turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. You asked about my world, about why I am who I am. Tell me, she said. My father was a dock worker, Nico began, his voice low. Honest man, broke his back for pennies. My uncle, he was different. He built the organization. When my father died, my uncle took me in. He taught me that in this city. You are either the hammer or the nail. I did not want to be the nail. He looked around the small, cozy apartment, looking out of place and yet strangely at peace. I inherited the life, the connections, the businesses, the violence. I have spent the last 5 years trying to legitimize it, moving money into construction, logistics, tech, trying to wash the blood out of the foundation, but the fear follows me. It is a shadow I cannot outrun. He squeezed her hand. I do not deserve you. Emily, you are good, you are light, and I am complicated. I am selfish enough to want you anyway. I am selfish enough to want to drag you into the light I am trying to build, even if my hands are still dirty. Emily felt the raw honesty of his words settle in her chest. It was terrifying. Yes, but it was real. Jackson had never given her truth. He had only given her pretty lies. Nico was offering her his darkness and asking if she could handle it. She leaned forward. I do not need you to be perfect, Nico. I just need you to be real. Nico closed his eyes for a moment, as if savoring the words. When he opened them, the heat was back, simmering and potent. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. Can I kiss you again, he asked. Yes, she whispered. He kissed her, and this time, it was a promise. It was a seal on the agreement they had just made. They talked for another hour, murmuring in the low light about the logistics of us, about boundaries, about how to handle the press. But underneath every word, the physical desire was a constant hum. Emily found herself unconsciously leaning closer to him, drawn to his warmth. Nico's eyes lingered on her neck, her mouth, his restraint palpable. Finally, Nico stood up. I should go, he said, though he made no move to the door. If I stay another 10 minutes, I will not be able to leave. Emily stood up with him. Okay. They walked to the door together. The air in the small hallway was thick. Nico opened the door, then paused. He turned back to her. He reached out, placing a single finger under her chin, tilting her face up to his. Good night, Emily, he said softly. He gave her a last slow kiss. It was gentle, barely a press of lips, but it carried a weight that shook her to her core. It was a kiss of reverence. He pulled away, his eyes searching hers one last time, before he turned and walked down the hallway. Emily leaned against the doorframe, watching him go until he disappeared down the stairs. She raised her fingers to her lips, touching the place where his mouth had been. She felt a sense of awe washing over her. The fear was still there, lurking in the corners, but for the first time, the hope was stronger. October in Harborview brought a chill that settled deep in the bones, a damp, gray fog rolling off the Atlantic that seemed to muffle the city. But for Emily Carter, the cold was kept at bay by a new, fragile warmth she was terrified to name. Over the last 4 weeks, she and Nico had carved out a small, secret world amidst the chaos of their lives. They did not go to the high-end clubs where the Hales preened, nor did they frequent the shadowed backrooms where Nico conducted his business. Instead, they found sanctuary in the spaces in between. They met at a 24-hour diner on the edge of the industrial district, a place where the neon sign buzzed with a dying hum and the coffee tasted like burnt hazelnuts. They sat in a vinyl booth with cracked red leather, their knees bumping under the table. Nico, a man who usually dined on steak and scotch, learned to appreciate blueberry pancakes at 2 a.m. He would listen as Emily talked about the specific chemistry of yeast and sugar, his dark eyes softening in a way that made her breath hitch. They took walks along the harbor wall, far away from the prying eyes of the marina. Nico would walk on the windward side, shielding her from the biting ocean breeze with his broad frame. He never tried to buy her things, true to his promise, but he gave her his time, a currency she knew was far more valuable to a man like him. And there were the stolen moments in his car. Parked on the quiet street a block from her apartment, the engine idling to keep the heater running, they would lose track of time. He would kiss her then, his hands framing her face as if she were something precious and breakable. And she would kiss him back with a ferocity that surprised them both. In those moments, with the rain drumming a rhythm on the roof and the scent of his sandalwood cologne filling the air, the label Gold Digger felt like a distant nightmare. When Nico looked at her, she was not a scandal or a headline. She was just Emily, and that was enough. But the world outside their car was not so kind. Their reprieve shattered on a Tuesday. A new article appeared on a prominent financial blog, quickly picked up by the local gossip rags. This time, the attack was not just on her morals, but on her integrity. The headline screamed, "The Black Widow of Harborview. Is Emily Carter selling secrets to the mob?" The article claimed, with zero evidence but plenty of venom, that Emily was acting as a double agent. It alleged she had siphoned financial data from Jackson Hale during their marriage and was now feeding insider information to the Moretti crime family to help them undercut legitimate businesses. The fallout was immediate. Emily was vacuuming the reception area of a law firm, one of her biggest cleaning contracts, when her phone rang. It was the owner of the cleaning service. "I'm sorry, Emily," the woman said, her voice brisk and unapologetic. "We have to let you go. Effective immediately." "What?" Emily gripped the handle of the vacuum, her knuckles turning white. "Why? I have never missed a shift. My work is perfect." "It is an image issue," the owner replied. "Our clients are sensitive. They do not want someone with your reputation mind having access to their offices after hours. We cannot risk the liability. Please return your uniform and badge by 5. The line went dead. Emily stood in the empty lobby, the silence pressing in on her. She had just used her last paycheck to cover the interest on her credit card. Noah's final tuition installment was due in 10 days. Without this job, she was underwater. She went home and sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills. The walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in. The shame was a hot, heavy stone in her gut. They were doing it again. They were taking everything she had built, brick by brick, just because they could. Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" Emily answered, her voice dull. "Emily? It is Sabrina." Emily stiffened, her hand tightening around the phone. "What do you want, Sabrina?" "I heard about your job," Sabrina said. Her voice was dripping with a sympathy that sounded as authentic as a $3 bill. "It is terrible. Jackson and I, well, we feel partially responsible. Things have gotten out of hand with the press." "You fed them the stories," Emily said, anger sparking in her chest. "We did no such thing," Sabrina lied smoothly. "But we want to help stop it. Look, Jackson feels bad. He wants to issue a joint statement with you, something that clears the air. He wants to say that the rumors about the financial secrets are false. If he says it, the blogs will back off. You can get your life back. Emily hesitated. It sounded too good to be true, but the desperation was clawing at her throat. Why would he do that? Because he is moving on. Emily, we are getting married. We do not want this drama hanging over us any more than you do. Meet us. We can draft the statement together. Sign it and end this. Where? The lake house, Sabrina said. It is private. No press. Just us. Come tonight at 8 and come alone. Emily, if you bring that gangster boyfriend of yours, Jackson will clam up, and the deal is off. Emily hung up. She knew she should tell Nico. She knew she should tell him everything, but if she told him, he would stop her. He would go to war. And she was so tired of being the reason for the violence. If she could fix this herself, if she could just get Jackson to sign one piece of paper, maybe she could finally be free. She called Noah first. Do not go, Noah said immediately, his voice sharp with panic. This is a trap. The Hales do not do favors. They eat people. I have to try. Noah, Emily argued, pacing her small kitchen. I lost my job today. I cannot pay your school. I cannot pay my rent. If I can clear my name, I can work again. I have to take the chance. At least take someone with you, Noah begged. I cannot, she said. If I do, they will not sign. I will be careful. I promise. Nico knew something was wrong the moment she texted him to cancel their dinner plans. Not feeling well. Going to sleep early. I will call you tomorrow. The text was too polite, too concise. Emily never texted like that. She used emojis. She rambled. She sent funny pictures of her cat. Nico sat in the back of the import office, staring at the screen. A cold, serpentine feeling coiled in his stomach. He tapped the desk, his rings clicking against the metal. Leo, Nico said without looking up. Boss? Where is she? She's not at her apartment, Leo said, looking at a tablet. One of the boys saw her leave 10 minutes ago. She got into her own car. She's heading north, toward the turnpike. North, Nico repeated. Toward the lake. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor. The Hales had a property up there, an isolated estate on the water. Get the car, Nico ordered, his voice dropping to a register that made Leo scramble for the keys. And bring the crew, all of them. The Hale Lake House was a sprawling structure of glass and timber, sitting dark and imposing against the night sky. The driveway was long and winding, lined with tall pines that blocked out the moonlight. Emily parked her car and walked to the front door, her boots crunching on the gravel. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She clutched her purse to her chest, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Just get the statement. Get out. She rang the bell. Sabrina opened the door. She was wearing a white cashmere sweater and holding a glass of wine, looking every inch the relaxed hostess. You came, Sabrina said, stepping back. Come in. Jackson is in the study. Emily stepped into the foyer. The house was cold. The air conditioning set too low. It smelled of lemon polish and something stale. Sabrina led her down the hall to the main living area, a room with vaulted ceilings and a wall of windows overlooking the black void of the lake. Jackson was sitting on a leather sofa. On the coffee table in front of him sat a folder and a camera set up on a tripod, its red light blinking. Hello, Emily, Jackson said. He didn't stand up. Where is the statement? Emily asked, staying near the doorway. Sabrina said we were going to draft a retraction. We already drafted it, Jackson said, sliding the folder across the table. You just need to sign. Emily walked forward slowly. She picked up the document. As she read the first paragraph, the blood drained from her face. It wasn't a retraction. It was a confession. I, Emily Carter, admit to stealing confidential financial records. I admit to soliciting funds from Dominic Moretti under false pretenses. I admit to being in significant debt due to gambling. I am not signing this, Emily said, her voice shaking. She dropped the paper on the table as if it were burning. This is all lies. You said you wanted to clear my name. We want to clear our name, Sabrina said, her voice turning hard and brittle. She walked over to stand next to Jackson. And the best way to do that is to prove that you are exactly what everyone says you are, a liar, a thief, a gold digger. If you sign it, Jackson said, leaning forward, we will give you $50,000. Cash, tonight. You can pay your little brother's tuition. You can leave town, start over somewhere else. And if I do not, Emily asked, backing away? Then we release the rest of the file, Jackson said. He tapped a second folder on the table. Doctored bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts in your name, and photos, very private photos. I never took photos like that, Emily whispered. Deep fakes are amazing these days. Sabrina smirked. By the time anyone proves they are fake, you will be ruined, unemployable, a social pariah, and Moretti. He will look like a fool for trusting you. His own people will turn on him for letting a rat into his bed. Emily looked between them. The cruelty was breathtaking. They didn't just want to hurt her. They wanted to annihilate her. They wanted to strip her of every shred of dignity she had left. No, Emily said. Her voice was quiet, but it was firm. Excuse me. Jackson stood up, his face reddening. No, Emily repeated, louder this time. I will not sign it. Keep your money. You can lie about me all you want. You can Photoshop whatever you want. But I will not put my name on a lie. I am not who you say I am. You are nothing, Sabrina snapped, her composure cracking. You are just a broke girl who chases rich men because she is too pathetic to make it on her own. No one will believe you. Emily, look at you. You are trash. The words hit her like physical blows, the old wound, the feeling of being small, powerless and voiceless, ripped open in her chest, tears spilled over her lashes, hot and stinging. She was trapped in a house with wolves, and she had walked right in. Sign the paper, Emily, Jackson shouted, stepping around the table. Or I swear to God I will. Crash. The front door didn't just open. It exploded inward with a sound like a gunshot. Wood splintered and glass shattered. Jackson froze. Sabrina screamed. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. Nico appeared in the archway of the living room. He was not wearing his suit jacket. His white shirt was rolled up to the elbows, revealing the tense cords of muscle in his forearms. He looked like a storm given human form. Behind him, 4 men filled the hallway, their faces grim, their hands hovering near their waistbands. Nico took one look at the scene, Emily standing in the center of the room, tears streaming down her face, Jackson advancing on her, and something dark and ancient snapped behind his eyes. Step away from her, Nico said. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, deadly calm rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the sound of a predator that had found its prey. Jackson blanched, stumbling back until his legs hit the coffee table. Now, hold on, Moretti. This is private property. You cannot just break in here. Nico didn't look at him. He walked straight to Emily. He placed his body between her and the Hales, acting as a living shield. He reached out and touched her arm, his grip firm and grounding. Did they touch you? Nico asked her, his eyes scanning her face for injuries. No, Emily whispered, shaking uncontrollably. They wanted me to sign. Nico looked at the papers on the table. He picked up the confession, read the first line, and then slowly crumpled it in his fist. He dropped the ball of paper on the floor. He turned to Jackson and Sabrina. Sabrina was trembling, clutching her wine glass so hard the stem looked ready to snap. You threatened her, Nico stated. We were making a deal. Jackson stammered. Business. Blackmail is not business, Nico said. It is a desperate act by weak people. Nico reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. You want to talk about paper trails? Nico asked, his voice icy. Let's talk about the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Jackson, let's talk about the tax fraud your father has been committing for 20 years. Let's talk about the payoffs to the zoning board. Jackson's eyes went wide. Where did you get that? I have everything, Nico said. I have the emails. I have the ledgers. And unlike your little fake confession, my evidence is real. If I hand this to the IRS and the district attorney tomorrow, the Hale dynasty is over. You will go to prison. Your father will go to prison. And you, Sabrina, you will be the fiancée of a convict with 0 assets." From the shadows of the hallway near the kitchen, a movement caught Nico's eye. A man in a dark suit, the representative from the Rinaldi syndicate who'd been overseeing the operation, stepped back, fading into the darkness. He had seen enough. The plan had failed. The Hales were compromised. The Rinaldis were cutting them loose. Nico turned back to Jackson. He took a step forward, invading Jackson's space until the other man was pressed against the wall. "If you ever," Nico whispered, enunciating every syllable, "and I mean ever, come near her again. If you mention her name, if you post a photo, if you even think about her, I will not send lawyers. I will not send the police. I will come myself." He let the silence hang, heavy and suffocating. "Do you understand?" "Yes," Jackson squeaked. "Yes, I understand." Nico turned his back on him, dismissing him as a threat. He turned to Emily. The rage in his eyes vanished, replaced by a profound, aching concern. "Let's go," he said softly. He guided her toward the door, his hand firm on her lower back. As they walked out, Nico's eyes flicked once to the side of the house. He noted the wooden framing. He noted the large propane tank sitting next to the detached garage. He noted the isolation of the property. He cataloged it all. A dark, final decision began to crystallize in the back of his mind. The Hales had tried to destroy his world. A lawsuit was not enough of a response. They needed a message written in a language they would understand. Outside, the air was crisp and biting. Nico led Emily past her car and toward his SUV. He opened the passenger door and helped her in, then rounded the hood to get in the driver's side. As soon as the door closed, sealing them in the quiet safety of the cab, Emily shattered. The adrenaline crashed. Her hands started shaking so violently she couldn't clasp them together. A sob tore from her throat, a raw, jagged sound of pure release. "I'm sorry," she gasped, her chest heaving. "I'm so sorry. Nico, I just wanted to fix it. I just wanted it to stop." Nico unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to her. He reached out, framing her face between his large, warm palms. His thumbs swept under her eyes, wiping away the streaks of mascara and tears. "Shh," he murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Do not apologize. Not to me. Never to me." "I walked right into it," she cried. "Noah told me not to go. I was so stupid." "You were brave," Nico corrected fiercely. "You were trying to protect us. But I am sorry. Emily, I am sorry I did not stop this sooner. I am sorry I let them make you feel like you had to do this alone." Emily collapsed forward, burying her face in his chest. She grabbed the lapels of his shirt, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning universe. Nico wrapped his arms around her. He held her tight, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other locked around her waist. He squeezed her, an iron grip that promised he would never let go. He pressed his face into her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the lingering fear. "I have you," he whispered into her hair, his lips brushing her temple. "I have you. You are safe. I swear on my life, you are safe." Emily sobbed into his shirt, the terror of the evening mixing with an overwhelming relief. In his arms, with his heart beating steadily against her cheek, she finally let go of the need to be strong. She let him hold her, and in the fierce tenderness of his embrace, she knew that there was no going back. He was her shelter and she was his heart, and anyone who tried to separate them would have to burn for it. For 3 days following the incident at the lake house, sleep was a stranger to Emily Carter. When she did manage to drift off, her dreams were fractured replays of Sabrina's sneering face and the terrifying sound of the front door exploding inward. She would wake up gasping, her sheets tangled around her legs, the echo of her own heartbeat loud in her ears. Her apartment, once her sanctuary, now felt like a cage made of glass. Every creak of the floorboards made her jump. Every vibration of her phone sent a jolt of adrenaline spiking through her veins. She found herself checking the locks 3 times an hour, haunted by the knowledge of how easily safety could be shattered by people with enough money and malice. But she was not alone in the cage. Nico was there. He had practically moved in. though he never formally asked. He simply stayed. The man who commanded a criminal empire spent his evenings in her tiny, galley-style kitchen, his large frame looking comically out of place as he chopped vegetables or stood over a simmering pot of tomato sauce. On Friday evening, the smell of garlic and basil filled the small space, temporarily chasing away the stale scent of anxiety. Emily sat at her small table, watching him. He had rolled up the sleeves of his black dress shirt, revealing the intricate tattoos on his forearms, his movements, efficient and domestic. It was a surreal juxtaposition. The hands that had threatened to destroy the Hale dynasty were currently carefully drying a ceramic plate. "You are staring," Nico said without turning around, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the quiet room. "I am just trying to reconcile the two versions of you," Emily admitted softly. "The one who broke down a door, and the one who washes my dishes." Nico turned, leaning his hip against the counter. He dried his hands on a towel, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that never seemed to waver. "They are the same man, Emily. One protects what is his, the other takes care of it." Later that night, they sat on her worn beige couch. The television was playing a mute rerun of an old sitcom, casting flickering blue light across the room. Emily was curled into the corner, her knees drawn up to her chest, a mug of tea warming her cold hands. Nico sat close enough that his thigh pressed against her foot, a solid, grounding point of contact. "I feel like a pawn," Emily whispered into the silence. She hadn't meant to say it, but the thought had been festering for days. "My whole life. First with Jackson, now with this war between your families. It feels like everyone is playing a game, and I am just the piece they move around to hurt each other. I am tired of being played. Nico went still. He set his glass of water on the coffee table with a deliberate, slow movement. He turned his body toward her, his expression serious. "I grew up in houses that smelled like power and fear," Nico said quietly. "I learned the rules of the game before I learned how to ride a bike. People like the Hales. They think the game never ends. They think they can move pieces forever because they have never had the board flipped over on them." He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on her knee. His skin was warm, his grip firm. "I'm very capable of ending games, Emily," he said. His voice carried a quiet, dangerous finality that sent a shiver down her spine. It was a promise of violence, yet coming from him, directed at her enemies, it made her feel an intoxicating mix of safety and fear. "I do not want you to become a monster for me," Emily said, searching his face. "I have always been a monster," Nico murmured. "But for you, I would be anything." He reached up, his fingers gently lifting her chin so she had to look him in the eye. "You are the bravest person I know. Do you know that? You walked away from millions of dollars because you refused to let them own you. You stood in that house, terrified, and you still said no. You kept your heart soft in a world that tried to turn it to stone?" Tears pricked Emily's eyes, overwhelmed by his words, by the raw vulnerability in his gaze. She moved without thinking. She uncurled her legs and shifted, threading her fingers through his. She placed his large hand over her racing heart, letting him feel the frantic rhythm of it. "It beats for you," she whispered, the confession trembling on her lips. "I love you, Nico. I know it is crazy. I know it is dangerous. But I love you." Nico went completely still. For a second, he looked struck, as if she had hit him. The steel in his eyes melted into something so agonizingly tender it hurt to look at. "Say it again," he rasped. "I love you." He pulled her to him. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in the crook of her neck, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I love you," Nico repeated into her skin, his voice low and earnest, vibrating against her collarbone. "I love you, Emily. God help me. I do." He lifted his head and his mouth found hers. The kiss was fiery and desperate, a release of weeks of fear, tension, and unspoken longing. Emily opened to him instantly, her hands sliding into the thick hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. Nico groaned, a sound torn from his chest, and shifted so that he was hovering over her, pressing her back into the cushions. His hands roamed over her back and sides, mapping the familiar curves through the fabric of her sweater, his touch possessive but reverent. The world outside the apartment ceased to exist. There were no Hales, no Rinaldis, no rumors. There was only the heat of his body, the taste of him, the desperate friction of their clothes as they pressed together. "Nico," she breathed against his mouth, her head spinning. He pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. His breathing was ragged, his pupils blown wide. "I am here," he murmured. "I have you. Is this okay? Am I too heavy?" "No," Emily whispered, her hands gripping his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath. "Do not stop. Please." Even as the desire pushed at their boundaries, turning the air in the room electric, Nico kept checking in. He murmured soft questions against her skin, his hands gentle even in their urgency, making sure she felt cherished, not consumed. For the first time in her life, Emily felt completely seen, completely safe, and completely loved, not for what she could give, but for who she was. Emily woke up at 3 a.m. The space beside her in the bed was cold. She sat up, blinking in the darkness, a knot of dread instantly twisting in her stomach. "Nico?" There was no answer. She threw off the covers and padded into the living room. It was empty. The lamp was off. On the small kitchen table, a single piece of paper sat under the salt shaker. Emily turned on the light, her hands shaking as she picked up the note. It was written in Nico's sharp, angular handwriting. "I have one last thing to handle. Stay here. I will be back before sunrise. I love you. One last thing." Emily knew exactly what that meant, the dark look in his eyes at the lake house. The way he had cataloged the structure, the ending of games. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. "Nico, please." She left a message, her voice cracking with panic. "Do not do this. Whatever you are thinking, do not do it. Please, just come back. You cannot take it back once it is done." Her phone buzzed a moment later with a text. "I am not hurting anyone. The house is empty. This is about a symbol, not bodies. Stay home, Emily." It was not a comfort. It was a confirmation. Emily ran to the bedroom and grabbed her jeans. She would not sit here and wait for him to destroy his future. She would not let him burn down the world for her. The Hale Lake house stood silent and imposing in the moonlight, a dark monument to old money and cruel secrets. The driveway was empty. The family was back in the city, recovering from the disaster of their failed blackmail attempt. Nico moved through the shadows of the property like a ghost. He had already checked the perimeter. His men had swept the house to ensure it was truly empty. No staff, no security, not even a stray dog. He walked through the unlocked back door, carrying a red canister. The smell of the accelerant was sharp and chemical, cutting through the scent of lemon polish. He walked through the living room where Jackson had tried to corner Emily. He walked past the table where they had laid out their lies. He remembered every insult they had hurled at her. Trash, gold digger, broke girl. He remembered the years of subtle abuse she had described, the way they had made her feel small so they could feel big. This house was not a home. It was a stage where they performed their cruelty. And Nico was bringing down the curtain. He moved methodically, not with the chaotic energy of an arsonist, but with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. He poured the liquid along the baseboards, over the expensive Persian rugs, across the heavy velvet curtains. He stopped at the front door, the canister empty. He turned to look back into the dark cavern of the house. He thought of Emily's face, tear-streaked and terrified, standing in this hallway. "Never again," Nico whispered to the darkness. He struck a single match. The flame flared to life, small and orange against the gloom. He watched it burn down toward his fingers for a second, then tossed it onto the soaked runner rug in the foyer. He stepped out the front door and closed it behind him. Emily's car skidded onto the gravel driveway 10 minutes later. She didn't need headlights to see. The night was already lit up. The house was blazing. Flames were licking up the interior of the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a terrifying, dancing orange glow across the dark surface of the lake. The heat rolled toward her in waves. Even from 50 yards away, she slammed the car into park and scrambled out, screaming his name. Nico! She saw him. He was standing near the edge of the driveway, silhouetted against the inferno. He was watching the fire with his hands in his pockets, motionless. At the sound of her voice, he turned. The orange light illuminated his face, revealing a flash of shock and something that looked like shame. "Emily!" Nico shouted, running toward her to intercept her before she got too close. "What are you doing here?" "What did you do?" Emily screamed, pounding her fists weakly against his chest as he caught her. "You set it on fire? Are you insane? You promised me. Nico, you promised you were trying to be better." "I am," Nico yelled back, grabbing her wrists gently to stop her frantic hitting. "I checked the house. It is empty. No one is hurt. It is just wood and glass. Emily, it is just things." "It is a crime," Emily cried, looking over his shoulder at the mansion, which was now fully engulfed. The roof was beginning to sag. "You could go to prison forever. Why would you risk us for this?" "Because I could not stand it," Nico roared, his voice cracking, raw with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "I could not stand the thought of this place existing. I could not stand knowing that the walls that held you while you broke were still standing. I wanted to erase it. I wanted to burn it all down so they could never look down on you from that balcony again." He pulled her close, though not trapping her, his eyes wild and pleading. "It was for you. It was a twisted, messed up way of protecting you. I know that, but I needed them to know that you are not theirs to ruin anymore." In the distance, the wail of sirens began to pierce the night air. The reality of the situation crashed down on them. The police were coming. The fire department was coming. Nico looked at the road, then back at Emily. He released her wrists and took a step back. "I have plans in motion," Nico said, speaking fast. "Legitimate businesses. I have been shifting assets for months. This was the last thing. The last act of the old life. My final message to the Hales." He looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. The fire raged behind him, a terrifying backdrop to his vulnerability. "You can go," Nico said, his voice breaking. "Get in your car. Drive away. You were never here. You can walk away to a safer life. Emily, find a baker. Find a nice guy who does not burn down houses. I will not chase you. I swear to you, I will never chase you again." Emily looked at the inferno. It was terrifying. It was violent. But then she looked at the man standing in front of it. She saw the man who had held her hand in the car, the man who had cooked pasta in her tiny kitchen, the man who had stood between her and her abusers and said no more. She saw a man who had been raised in violence trying to use the only language he knew to say, "I love you." She did not condone what he did. But God help her. She understood why. "I am not going anywhere," Emily said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Nico blinked, stunned. "Emily, the police." "I do not care," Emily said. She stepped forward and grabbed his hand, interlacing their fingers. "If you are ready to leave this cycle, if this really is the last time, then I am staying. I am walking with you, even if it is messy, even if we have to fight for it." Nico stared at her, as if he was seeing a miracle. He squeezed her hand so hard it almost hurt. "It is the last time. I promise." "Then let's go," Emily said. They turned and walked toward his car, leaving the burning effigy of her past behind them, driving away just as the first fire engine rounded the bend. 7 months later. The townhouse was narrow, made of brownstone, and sat on a quiet, tree-lined street in a neighborhood where people walked their dogs at sunset. It was modest compared to the penthouses of Harborview, but it had a small balcony and a kitchen that smelled of vanilla and yeast. Nico sat at the kitchen table, reviewing a security contract on his tablet. His consulting firm was doing well, legitimate, boring, and safe. He still had men who watched the street, and the authorities kept a close eye on his tax returns, but the shadow of the RICO charges had faded. The television in the corner was playing the evening news. The anchor was discussing the ongoing investigation into the Hale family fortune. Following an anonymous tip and a massive data leak, the IRS had frozen the Hale assets. Jackson was currently out on bail, awaiting trial for fraud. The lake house, which had burned to the ground in a suspected electrical fire, was just an insurance claim that had been denied due to the frozen accounts. The front door opened. Emily walked in, dusting flour off her jeans. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright. "The bakery was insane today," she said, dropping her keys in the bowl. "We sold out of the sourdough by noon." Nico stood up and walked over to her. He kissed her forehead, inhaling the scent of bread and rain. "I told you your recipe was better?" "You are biased," Emily smiled, leaning into him. "I am right," Nico corrected. Later that evening, they sat on the tiny balcony. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a sea of diamonds that no longer felt like they were mocking Emily for what she didn't have. She sat between Nico's legs, her back resting against his broad chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. Her hands rested over his, their fingers intertwined over her stomach. "Noah called," Emily said softly. "He got his grades. Straight A's." "Smart kid," Nico rumbled, his chin resting on her shoulder. "We should take him somewhere to celebrate. Maybe the mountains? Somewhere quiet?" "I would like that," Emily said. She paused, tracing the line of a vein on Nico's hand. "Do you miss it? The power?" Nico tightened his arms around her slightly. "I miss the certainty of it sometimes, but then I come home, and I smell flour, and I see you, and I realize I never had power before. I just had leverage. This..." He kissed the sensitive spot just below her ear. "This is power. Maybe," Emily mused, looking out at the skyline, "maybe in a few years, when the bakery is mine, maybe we can think about other things, expanding the family." Nico went still for a heartbeat, then turned his face into her neck, his breath warm against her skin. "Yeah, I would like that very much." Emily turned in his arms, cupping his face. His edges were still sharp, his eyes still dark with the history he carried, but he was hers. She kissed him slowly, deeply, pouring all the past pain and the present hope into the simple act. As they held each other in the cool evening air, the memory of a burning house became just that, a memory, fading like smoke in the wind. What remained was a love that had not been bought with diamonds or begged for in silence. It had been fought for, piece by imperfect piece, through fire and rain, until it finally, truly, felt like home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Emily and Nico as much as I enjoyed telling it. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment down below and say hello. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an episode. And tell me in the comments, do you think Nico went too far by burning down the house? Or was it the ultimate act of protection? I can't wait to read your thoughts. Until next time.